You're listening to
and such a short amount of time to do it in. We were really
a Mamma Mia podcast.
Just a heads up, this podcast talks a lot about dealing with grief. So if you're missing a loved one or feeling a bit bleak, we see you. Please hang in there. Hello.
Hi, Mia. How are you?
How are you, my friend? Good to see you. Sorry about all the technology.
That's all right. No problem at all.
Christmas. Ho, ho, ho. It's often talked about as the most wonderful time of the year. But at the end of an unspeakably tough 12 months, it feels like we're all crawling to the finish line that is Christmas in 2020. And if Christmas was brought to us by anything this year, I think it's probably loss and disappointment. Because now, with lots of people's Christmas plans cancelled or impacted by this new outbreak in Sydney, well, it's filled with feelings of grief. Grief for a year that we didn't have, grief for family we can't see, milestones that couldn't be celebrated, and grief for those we lost along the way. From drought to bushfires to global pandemic, 2020 has been a shit show. So how can we look after ourselves during this time? From Mamma Mia, I'm Mia Friedman, and you're listening to No Filter, a weekly interview podcast with people who tell their stories very candidly and aren't afraid to be all kinds of vulnerable. 2 years ago, I sat down with grief counsellor Petrea King to talk about how to face Christmas when life is not as you know it. She's counselled over 120,000 people who are living with cancer and other life-challenging illnesses or dealing with grief, loss, trauma and tragedy through her foundation, Quest for Life. And because this year has really been life as we don't know it, I thought it was time to talk to Petrea again, to check in with her and hear what she has to say about grief and about lowering the bar this Christmas and this holiday season, because it is okay not to be okay. Please enjoy this conversation with Petrea. It helped me a lot. Before we start talking about Christmas, I wanted to just ask you more broadly, Petrea, about grief in 2020, because it's been a year of lots of different kinds of grief. How have you found it's played out for people that you've spoken to?
Well, it depends very much, of course, on people's circumstances. People in the city were really distressed by what they saw happening in the fires and the drought before that, but a little bit removed from it. But then, of course, all the people who went through the fires and lived with the imminence of those fires for so long, it was a very different experience. And I think a tremendous number of people were taken completely by surprise that such a thing could happen in their area. And of course, there's been the enormous grief about the environment, about the animals, about loss of life, of human life, of homes, of communities. So it's been a very difficult year for many, many people. And people, of course, respond in different ways. Some people are very resilient and kind of take things in their stride, and other people have really been knocked for six.
It's so funny when you just mentioned the bushfires. It startled me for a second because COVID's just come and sort of taken over everything. And you make such a good point, because the people who were still reeling from the grief of, in some cases, losing property or losing loved ones or just losing a sense of security in their environment didn't even have time to recover before COVID hit.
No, that's exactly right. And indeed, what a lot of people don't understand, when you're going through trauma, you don't actually do any of the emotional expression during that time. Most of us, whether it's a diagnosis of a serious illness, whether it's an impending disaster, whether it's the long, tedious months and years of drought that happened before the fires, people don't deal with the emotions at the time. We just galvanise ourselves to get through the experience, to look after our loved ones, to take care of material things. Then it's usually weeks later, and in fact, I think we're about to hit that time now, because everyone postponed the grief and the distress around the fires into COVID, and then everyone was preoccupied with COVID. And so a lot of these very complex emotions from trauma will only now beginning to be experienced by many people, which will take them completely by surprise, because we're very good at parking grief for a later time when we're more able to deal with it. And now as we come more or less, to this part of COVID where we're more familiar with what needs to happen, there's more liberty, more freedoms. So now it's very likely that people are going to fall in a bit of a heap over Christmas and the New Year period and wonder why they're so tired and why they may not be functioning in their usual competent way.
I'm so glad you say that, because as life does return to COVID normal and people are all about, let's put this year behind us, things are easier now, we can see our loved ones, the impression would be that everyone would be feeling fantastic. And it's Christmas. That's not necessarily the case, you say.
No, not at all. In fact, I think it'll be a very different Christmas for many people this year. As I said, people literally park the trauma until a later time to deal with it. And it tends to manifest in poor sleep, maybe in dreams, maybe even nightmares, maybe flashbacks, lack of concentration, memories no good, kind of glaze over in the middle of conversations, need a lot more sleep. And people may be feeling emotionally a little more fragile at this time as well. And of course, they really don't understand why. They think, what's the matter with me? We're sort of through COVID, sort of. The fires are, they're almost a year ago. Why aren't I feeling on top of things? And they're only just beginning now to deal with the aftermath. You see, when we go through any of these experiences, we secrete a lot of cortisol in our system. And cortisol is meant really for short, sharp activities, like when the bear came into the cave so we could run like mad or fight the bear. Interestingly, cortisol in our system completely depresses the immune system. Your immune system can't function in a cortisol environment. And so where the answer is not to run and not to fight, because we've all had the experience of a heightened level of cortisol, but exercise is the thing that uses up that cortisol. And as the cortisol comes down, up comes our immune system to deal with the consequences of our encounter with the bear. But when the encounters are emotional encounters, there's nothing to run from, there's nothing to fight. And we're left with those fairly high levels of cortisone, which becomes adrenaline in our system. Now, on top of that, a lot of people have been inside for months, which means our vitamin D level is much lower than it might be. And so people really need to get in the sun, that early morning sun, before you slip, slop, slap. Get in that early morning sun to increase the vitamin D. Some of this is just physiological. When we're also in close contact with each other, we're exchanging bacteria and viruses all the time, which I know none of us want to dwell on for terribly long. But the fact is that's how our immune system also stays strong, because we're constantly challenging one another's immune system through our close interactions. So we haven't had that. We haven't had vitamin D. We've had elevated cortisol and adrenaline. So I would really encourage people to use this Christmas period as a real reset for 2021 and make sure they get early nights and drink lots of fluids and eat healthily and keep the alcohol to a minimum, which I know, of course, at Christmas is difficult for a lot of people, but really helpful.
That's so interesting that you say that, and so relieving to me, and I am sure many other people who are kind of saying, what's wrong with me? I mean, I've got friends who keep falling over and I've been feeling so forgetful, and other people who just can't wake up in the morning, or who keep missing meetings, or who just can't seem to get it together. And none of us have really known why. We've all felt that it's a personal failing rather than a situational effect of the year that we've had.
Yeah. It's such an important message, Mia, to get out into the community, because you and a lot of other people are kind of wondering what's happened to everybody. The people aren't being as punctual, people aren't getting things done on time. There's a lot of stress right now. And yet we all scrub up okay, hopefully. We scrub up okay, but it's good to ask people, do you feel as good as you look?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, I think we talked about this last year too. When you meet someone, rather than say, "Oh, you look well," which often means, "Please don't tell me how you feel," because I might be up to here with how I feel. So if you ask a person, "Do you feel as good as you look? How's this year been for you?" You'll get a much deeper conversation and a much realer conversation with that person as well.
Something that I've really noticed this year is that people have done this thing called the complaint sandwich, where you ask them how they are and they'll say, "Actually, I'm so lucky. I've still got a job. No one in my family got sick. So many people have it worse. But actually," and then they'll say something and then they'll finish with, "But I'm really fortunate and I'm just, it could have been so much worse."
Yeah. I hadn't heard of a complaint sandwich, but isn't that perfect? It's exactly what people are doing. And I think people are kind of acknowledging that they're not doing so well and trying to reassure themselves it is going to get better. And I guess, maybe we're in for a time where our resilience is really going to be tested. We feel like, oh, well, the fires are over, oh, COVID's almost over, certainly not in other places, but in Australia it's been very well managed. But in our lives in general, on top of whatever's happened to us as a community, we've also had many people who are dealing with a diagnosis of a serious illness, or someone they love is mentally unwell or very depressed or suicidal. We know that there's been an increase in domestic violence. There's been a lot more conflict at home and trauma at home. And so people, in a way, are really glad to get out of the home. Some people really glad to get out of the home and get back into some kind of normality. But they're still not taking on board that there's a backlog of stress that really hasn't been dealt with. And I guess some of the most useful ways of dealing with that stress, certainly our willingness to be human, our willingness to have all of the emotions of being a human being, and not just say, "I'm happy to have all of the joyous ones around Christmas, but I don't want to go anywhere near sadness, depression, anxiety. I don't want to know about those feelings." But the problem is, if we can't experience our challenging feelings, we're no good at experiencing our joy and our happiness either. And as human beings, we need to learn to be comfortable with both the uplifting, joyous feelings that we have, but also most people have been through a very scary experience. And it's okay to acknowledge, gosh, this was unfamiliar territory. And as a community, we got through it quite well. But as individuals, depending on what else might be going on in their life, they may or may not have travelled so well this year.
I want to go back to grief because obviously there are the big griefs of losing a loved one or relationships ending. But 2020 feels like it was marked for almost everybody by a lot of little griefs. Cancelled weddings, cancelled holidays, missing milestone birthdays, end of school occasions. And in the scheme of things, in a pandemic, and it's kind of like that complaint sandwich, no one felt like they were allowed to be sufficiently devastated by those things. How do we process all those little griefs and feel okay about acknowledging them as griefs?
Well, they are griefs, maybe different from bereavement of a loved one. Even the grief around our loss of routine, our going to the office, our colleagues, being with friends, not being able to be with our elderly parents. My mum turns 99 on Friday, and it'll be the first time that I'm actually allowed to hug her if I'm quiet about it. We've been visiting behind glass all through this time, and we're just at a point now where we can actually see each other in the flesh. So there have been all these little griefs. And the tensions that come with those too of, well, what if that person dies before I get to hug them again? All those people who didn't get to say goodbye to their loved ones, who couldn't hold the hand, who couldn't stroke the brow, who were looking at a distance at their loved one dying and yet not able to gather them up. So there are the little griefs of all of the little interactions that we have with our colleagues at work that are so important to our day. And the grief of, those routines of how we get to work. our usual train or our usual bus, and the people that we see on that, even though they might be complete strangers to us. It's all of those regularity things that we have in our life that tend to become second nature to us because we do them so often. And yet when they're stripped away, we also find a little bit of our identity's been stripped away. It's kind of, we know who we are by the way we interact with other people through our relationships. And yet a lot of people have been much more isolated this year and working behind closed doors. So we've very much been thrown back on ourselves and how we feel about ourselves. And for some people, that's lovely. People with social anxiety have quite enjoyed this year, perhaps because they haven't had to go out and mix with a lot of people. But for many people, their interactions with their colleagues at work and just the hustle and bustle of to and fro from work and to and fro from school and seeing other people is just part of our life. And we grieve it a little when it's thrown up in the air. The other thing too that I think happens is that sometimes we're used to supporting a friend when a friend has been given a diagnosis or, their parent is dying or something has happened in their life. We're used to reaching out and giving support to our colleagues and friends and certainly our loved ones. But we've gone through this experience collectively. This is the first time really, I think, that because some of us who've had a life-threatening illness or other griefs and traumas, we know life can change in a moment. It can change in a phone call, it can change in a breath, it can change in a conversation, and it's never the same again. But now, globally, we know life can change in a moment. And I think that's a huge awakening for many people.
It's very unsettling.
It's very unsettling, which, most people wake up to their life, really wake up to their life, either through suffering or through inspiration. Sometimes as kids, we're inspired to make a difference. We want to contribute in some way to the world and we can be quite passionate about it. And then we can kind of get bogged down with mortgages and rentals and educating kids and life takes on all of these routines that become quite habitual in our daily doings. And that's what we've really missed this year because it all stopped. And so I know a lot of people have also considered over this year, because of all of these little griefs that have happened, I'm not sure I want to go back to the life that I was living. I'm not sure that I want that commute anymore. I'm not sure that I want the pressure of so much busyness going on in my life. And maybe I want to create a different kind of life for myself, maybe where I begin to follow a passion that I've always had but have never fulfilled. Maybe I want to retrain into a different career. Maybe I want to move out of the city. Lots of people have done that. I know in Bundanoon, where I live, many, many people have come into properties are only on the market for a week or so and then they're gone.
A lot of tree changes and sea changes.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when we're faced with suffering, we begin to question, how am I living my life? Am I living the life I want to live? If not, why not? And what am I going to do about that? And so that can have some upsides to it, but for other people, it's been mostly downsides. So it's a real mixture at the moment for people.
You're listening to No Filter with me, Mia Friedman and Petrea King on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. I have a close friend who's a breast physician and, doctors and many health professionals obviously kept working through COVID and every day people are diagnosed with all kinds of cancers and illnesses. And she was saying that the women that she diagnosed with breast cancer during lockdown, it was so difficult, like something that was already so difficult for people who got really bad news this year or lost someone this year. It was compounded 100-fold by the circumstances of lockdown. And it's almost like those griefs and those traumas have been a little bit lost along the way.
Exactly. And I think people are a bit confused by it because they don't feel necessarily entitled to their upset. And I can only imagine for people who've been diagnosed through this time, and I know a lot of people postponed going to the doctor with various issues that they had that ended up being quite serious because they just felt like, I'm up to here with everything that's going on in my life right now. And if I've got an illness, I just don't want to know about it right now because I just can't take it on board. And of course, there's no escaping grief. And when someone dies, and to be locked up at home and not be able to go through the rituals of funerals and conversations and hugs and hanging on to each other and all of those shared tears that are so important at that time that people have been denied. And for a lot of people, it's quite hard to even access those tears on their own at home. It's much easier sometimes in a shared environment. Some people are so afraid of their tears that if I start crying, I might never stop, or I might disintegrate into a million fragments. That's why I was looking forward to this conversation today, just to alert people that you may be feeling quite flat during this time. And the joy of children may be a sharp contrast to how you're feeling, because you might have been glad just to have survived this year and not feel like you flourished through this year at all. And I know someone said, I'm not getting a 2021 diary until I've seen a preview. I think a lot of people are feeling like that of, I just hope next year won't be full of as many disasters. But also maybe we are entering a time, and have been for some time actually, entering a time of great change on the planet. And maybe that's a really good reason to really look at your personal resilience, what you do to care for yourself, because life is a bit of a roller coaster ride. And personally, I love roller coasters, but a lot of people find them their worst nightmare. Even those who love roller coasters, there's no way I'd get on one without a seatbelt. And yet now on planet Earth, we're in for a bit of a roller coaster ride. And certainly this year has shown us what's possible. And so it's really important that we find and fasten our own seatbelt.
How do we do that?
That's the sure knowledge of how to look after yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, whatever that is for you. So that means we need to nourish our bodies appropriately. We need to rest them. We need to exercise them. You're not your body, but you've got one. So take good care of it. You're not your brain, you've got one. And the brain makes a great servant, a shocker of a master. So we need to be able to quieten down our brain, because when the brain is in our service, we have access to insight, intuition, wisdom, humour, spontaneity, creativity, and compassion. Those are all the qualities of our essential nature. But it's second nature to us to worry ourselves sick, to project all of our fears, worries, concerns into the future, or we go into rehashing, resenting, blaming, shaming about the past. And whenever the brain's in the future or in the past, we lose all the possibilities of the present moment. And so finding some exercises, whether it's Tai Chi, whether it's painting, whether it's meditation, mindfulness, puzzles, colouring in, all these activities that quieten down the brain so we have access to those really valuable qualities that are fantastic for your resilience as well. And to recognise we're not our thoughts, we're not our feelings. We have thoughts, we have feelings. So to be truly resilient means that we need to be in the driver's seat and manage our physical body, manage our mind, manage our emotions. Otherwise, they have their way with us, and that can be much more colourful and much more distressing.
There are so many people who will be separated from loved ones this Christmas. And for those with family overseas or Australians who might be overseas with family here, not even knowing when they'll see each other again. And then there are those who are ill or who have lost loved ones this year. How do you cope with that? Like on this day where you're meant to be super happy, when there's all this pop cultural messages that it's the happiest day of the year and you're just feeling utterly bleak. How do you process that? What do you do?
Let go the idea of having to be happy. I know we make an effort, particularly if we've got grandchildren or children around us, we make an effort. I would encourage people to simplify this Christmas as much as possible. Don't make a big deal out of this Christmas. Don't put everybody in the family under more pressure to produce a fabulous Christmas when this has been such a challenging year. You know, how would we have managed without technology through this time? At least we're able to FaceTime or Zoom or Skype with our loved ones pretty much regardless of where they are in the world. So by all means, set the Zoom up on the Christmas table, have a chair for that person who's missing from the Christmas table this year, maybe have a flower arrangement where they sit, or that's where the Zoom camera is, so that people can feel included even though they may have to be separated at this time. I would really encourage people to minimise the amount of alcohol, to maximise the amount of exercise and getting out and into fresh air and sunshine and grounded, feet on the earth. You know, some of these things where we've been isolated from nature, we've been shut up at home, so we need to get out in the sunshine, have fresh air, exercise, feet on the ground, and quieten down that busy, busy brain. And then don't push away the emotions that might come up. And you might be surprised that, you know, you can be sitting on the beach, you can be surrounded with family, and suddenly a wave of sadness comes over you. And it's okay, there's sadness. It's okay to feel sad. This is how feeling sad feels for me. It's not who I am, so don't say I am sad. It's something I'm feeling right now. And I think the ability to witness ourselves having these emotions rather than labeling ourselves as these emotions. There's a big difference between I am angry and I feel angry. On a scale of 0 to 10, I might be a 9, but I might not want to express it. I might not want to speak it. I might not want to act from that feeling. And so it's part of mastery, really, of our emotional literacy and emotional well-being and resilience is our ability to witness ourselves having a feeling, but not necessarily letting it be the stimulus for our words or our actions.
Petrea, I haven't asked how your year's been. How have you been doing?
Look, it's a bit of a confession to say I've had actually a fabulous year.
I'm so glad. I know there's the guilt that goes along with that, isn't there?
I know you feel a little bit bad saying it, but of course, because our work is with people who are experiencing trauma, probably our work has doubled this year. So we've been very, very busy, both delivering online programs into bushfire impacted communities. We did have teams of people out in those communities offering counselling and massage and deep relaxation classes and support groups. So we had teams out there who were in each town for a week, and then they go back a month later for another week, a month later for another week, so that we built a long-term relationship with people. And we could also send anyone with post-traumatic stress injuries back to the centre, the Quest for Life Centre in Bundanoon, to undertake a 5-day program.
Was Bundanoon badly affected by the fires?
Yes, we had 4 houses that were lost. Very sadly for those people, that was literally a fire tornado that, you know, was impossible to defend. But we were evacuated 2 or 3 times, and the fire was right on the Moreton National Park and actually came at us from several fronts. So it was a very stressful time for our local community. But again, we were able to open the doors at Quest and have it as a drop-in place so that people could come and have a cuppa, have a chat, have a massage, have a counselling. Also, I was online every night at 7:30 just through Facebook to do a bit of a meditation and to chat to people about managing anxiety and all sorts of things. And that opened us into many, many different arenas. So we've been working with corporate groups and preschool teachers and Catholic principals and the Defence Force, so many different groups who have all had their challenges during these last few months. So we've been very pleased to be able to be of some assistance.
Never have your words or your work been more needed. Petrea, you are such a national treasure. Honestly, thank you for everything you do and for making so many of us this Christmas feel normal, that there's not something wrong with us, that we're tired and forgetful and sad and tearful, and that's not who we are. It's just how we feel.
Exactly. I hope people will go to bed early, get some exercise, eat well, drink lots of water, connect with nature and your loved ones where that's possible, either online or in person.
Happy holidays, Petrea.
Yeah, happy holidays to everyone.
That has to be the question that I'm going to ask, not just at Christmas, that idea of do you feel as good as you look? I think that is the most amazing question for any time of year and for any year, because as Petrea said, it just cuts away the small talk and gives people the space to actually be honest and to have a more meaningful response. And yet, if they don't want to do that, if the way they are dealing with things is by compartmentalizing it and they don't want to rummage around in their pocket of grief, they can just say, oh yeah, ha ha ha, thanks, you must need glasses, or they can sort of bat it away in a funny way if they don't want to go there. But at least you've opened the door if they decide that they want to walk through it. I do hope you are feeling okay. One of the hardest things about feeling lousy at a time when we're told we should be feeling great and should be celebrating is that it's compounded. So you feel lousy and then you feel alone for being lousy and you feel like you're the only one. And so that feeling of isolation can make things feel worse. Just be kind to yourself. And if you want to listen to my previous chat with Petrea from 2018, we will put a link in the show notes. The show notes are those things when you scroll down in your podcast app while you're listening to the episode, you should be able to find the show notes there. You can find more episodes of No Filter on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. This episode was produced by Leah Porges. The executive producer of No Filter is Eliza Ratliff, and I'm Mia Friedman. Happy holidays, whatever it is that you celebrate, wherever you are, sending lots of love.
Mamma Mia acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this podcast on, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures.